Hi, welcome to a new episode in the Internet Surfer, hosting the most horror and creepiest stories from Reddit. Please don't forget to comment, like, share, and subscribe. Enjoy.
Reddit, what is your creepiest, most unnerving story? Real or not, please creep us out. Episode 5.
A couple years back, some friends and I decided to take a couple weeks off work to go on a road trip. Our goal was to drive through the states from the SE up to Pennsylvania and back. We would drive throughout the night and pitch our tents before dusk, sleep a little and spend the day checking out the area we stopped in. Sometimes it would be out in the middle of nowhere, sometimes near a city. It was an interesting way to do things. We were driving through Alabama when we made our stop. Thing about Alabama is that the interstate through it is incredibly boring. Pretty much straight and a lot of trees. We knew this in advance, so we charted a path through that would have us drive through the more rural areas. We got about 3/4 ths the way through going from south to north when we decided to stop for the morning. We found a large patch of field that didn't have any "no trespassing" signs visible and set up camp. Since we took turns driving, the rest of us took naps in the car. When we stopped to camp, it was mostly to rest out of the car. It was mostly to be able to take a nap without being cramped together or having someone else drool on you. It was about noon when everyone was ready to pack up and explore. The spot we camped in was a beautiful, short grass field. About 500 or so feet from where we chilled was a barn. It looked new and was really picturesque. We packed everything back into the car and decided to hoof it over to the barn and check it out. Everyone took off in different directions when we got there to look around. I was on the side, poking around the tall grass that had started to conceal some equipment, when I hear one of my friends yelling. I walk in the barn and the other two had already joined my loud friend. They were standing around what looked to be a trap door on the floor near the back of the barn. My friend tells us she heard crying and when she found the trap door, it stopped. We all stood there for a minute in silence, listening. All we heard was the wind blowing through the barn. I look up and start to say something when, out of nowhere, there is a large crash. It sounded like something slammed against the other side of the trap door. Everyone booked without a second glance. Except me. I couldn't move. My legs didn't work. I just stood there staring at the door in wide-eyed terror. My brain was screaming for me to run, begging my legs to move and I couldn't. Then, like a rubber band snapping into place, my body spun 180 degrees in the opposite direction. After what felt like an eternity, my legs decided to act. Just as I felt my left leg start to push off, the world went black. Pitch black. It looked and felt like someone threw a heavy blanket over me. Then the screaming started. It sounded like a young child screaming at the top of their lungs. It never stopped. There was no pause for breath. I think I screamed. I say I think because I couldn't hear myself screaming over the child's scream. I felt something icy cold in my chest and I started having trouble breathing. It felt like something grabbed my heart. Primal survival instincts kicked in and I began to thrash my arms around, hoping to hit something, anything that would make it stop. It didn't help. I gathered as much strength left and forced myself to run. I didn't know where I was and it didn't matter, I just had to run. And I did, full speed, straight into a low-hanging beam. I was down and out. I don't know long. I just remember waking up in the grass near my car. My left eye was sealed shut from dried blood. Everyone was sitting next to the car, not talking. When they noticed I woke up, they helped me get cleaned up. I used a bottle of water to clean the blood off my face and bandages from my first aid kit to cover the huge gash in my forehead. I asked what happened. They told me that they had made it to the car when they realized that I wasn't with them. Of course, since it was my car, I had the keys, so they were looked out. That was when they heard me screaming. They actually told me they running to the town to get the police instead of going back for me. I never asked why they decided to come back for me, I was just glad that they did. The trap door was wide open. They actually dragged me across the floor by my feet because no one would come around the other side of me and have their back to the door. Here's the kicker. After they explain all this to me, one of them tells me to turn around and check out the barn. I look behind me and the beautiful barn we saw and went to investigate is now decrepit and old. I look back at my friends and they stare back with blank expressions. Without saying anything else, I hand my keys to one of my friends and drive off. We didn't camp out like that again for the rest of the trip. We found campgrounds to stay at or we just slept in the car. None of us has mentioned the incident since. This happened about 10 years ago. I'm a freshman at college. I moved into my dorm and I'm the first person there. The guy I was supposed to room with wasn't there yet. I had found out in advance who he was and worked out details about who would bring what before we arrived. A week goes by and I hear nothing from him. I'm busy learning where my classes are and just getting situated in to really worry about it. The 8th day and I get back to the dorm from my last class and there he is, sitting in his bed. I walk over to the guy to say hi and he looks like shit. He is pale and thin. Afraid he is sick with something I don't get too close. I introduce myself and try to make small talk with him, but he doesn't even look at me. He makes a few grunts and nods, but doesn't actually talk to me, let alone look in my general direction. I also noticed that he didn't bring anything with him. No luggage, no clothes, none of the stuff we agreed he would bring. This goes on for another week. I wake up and he's just sitting on his bed. Either asleep sitting up or just staring off to space. I never saw him move off the bed to eat, go to the bathroom or just move around. As far as I knew, he wasn't even going to classes. I wake up, he's in bed. I get home, he's in bed. The only indication that I got that he actually got off his bed would be in the middle of the night. I would hear him rustling around. On occasion I would hear a door open or shut and there would be times some of my stuff would be moved. Again, with being new at college, I had other stuff on my mind. To be honest, I was really busy with schoolwork to really carry on a conversation or interact with him. After a couple days, I noticed a smell. It wasn't a pleasant smell to begin with, but as time went on, it got stronger. I noticed that the clothes he was wearing looked like what he was wearing when he arrived. He really looked bad as well. He could barely keep his eyes open, his head drooped a lot like he was constantly nodding off or didn't have the strength to hold it up. He looked like he had lost even more weight and his skin had turned an ashen color. He looked like death warmed over. I tried to talk to him about his health and the fact that the place started to reek because of him. Nothing. Not even a grunt. I'm at my wit's end. The place smells and no amount of air spray get rid of it. I can't concentrate or sleep because of the smell. After 5 days of this, I go talk to the RO. I explain what is going on with my roomie. He gives me a strange look and tells me they are still looking for a roommate for me because the one I was supposed to have dropped out. I tell him there is a smelly guy in my room and if he's not my roommate, I don't know who he is. So the RO and I head back to the room and it's empty. He's gone. The only thing left was a ruffled bed and an overpowering stench of rot. Of course the RO thinks I'm a delusional, dirty idiot. I was speechless. I couldn't explain where the guy went to. I had to beg the RO to get the bed and bedding out and have it replaced. I decided to call the guy to see what was up and his mom answered. We had talked a couple times so she knew me by voice. I asked about him. Told her that he was here for a week and explained everything that had happened for the week that he was here. The line went cold for a few seconds and then she came back. Her voice had changed. She sounded sad and angry at the same time. She explained that he had gotten sick about 3 weeks ago. After a week of not getting better, they took him to the hospital, and after a week of being there, his body just shut down and he died. He was buried that weekend. She thought I had called to taunt her about his death, screamed at me and hung up the phone. I never called her again. When I was 9 years old, my grandfather was in the hospital. He was suffering from bone cancer and diabetes. As his health declined, my visits with him became more and more limited. Until there came a day that I was told I was no longer allowed to see him. To this day, I still don't know the reasoning behind this, but I was my grandfather's favorite person in the world and vice versa, and I have my theories that my family didn't want me to remember him in this way. My grandfather was my best friend, and he being in the hospital confused me. I knew he was sick, but I did not grasp the extent of his sickness until one day, when I was playing at my mother's friend's home, and the rest of my family was at the hospital with my grandfather. I remember stopping whatever I was doing at the time because I was overcome with a very strange feeling. I got up and slowly walked into the kitchen where my mother's friend was preparing our snack. She looked at me in a very peculiar manner and asked me what was wrong, but I could not look at her. The only thing I could focus on was the phone hanging on the wall, and then in a voice almost not even my own I heard myself say, "That phone is going to ring, and the person on the other end is going to tell you my grandpa just died." I stood there for a couple seconds and then turned to walk outside through an open door to my left. As I was exiting the house, I heard several sharp rings of a telephone. I walked to the swing set in the yard and started swinging, alone, slowly. After a couple minutes I looked up and saw my mother's friend, in tears, staring at me from just inside the doorway with a look of horror on her face, and all I did was smile at her. From 1990 to 1997, I lived with my family in Naperville, Illinois, in a typical subdevelopment in a typical house that was built in the 70s. I was a teenager, class of 96, go Skins. Anyway, this house had what I jokingly refer to as a ghost parrot. That is, it mimicked sounds. I dropped a bunch of colored pencils on the tile floor of the kitchen one day. My brother and I were upstairs the following day, when the exact same sound, as if it had been recorded, came from the bathroom in between our rooms. We looked inside, nothing on the floor. "Ha! Nice one," we said. The joking always made us feel better. Our tomcat loved to play at night, and he tore up and down the stairs just about every night chasing who knows what. The distinct sound of cat claws on carpet was our lullaby. My dad hated it. "Someone stop that cat. We don't have money to be replacing carpet all the time." Well, one night the crazy cat is playing, Dad shouts, and my brother steps out of his room to put a stop to it. After a moment, he opens my door while I'm in bed reading. He asks me if I'd been listening to the cat tearing up and down the steps. "Of course," he says, us too. It's just that." "What?" I ask. I get up and follow him to his room. In his closet, the cat is curled up in his clothes hamper fast asleep. I didn't know he was in here, I just opened my closet door just now. We slowly turned to the stairs. Silence. Clearly, I grabbed my pillow and bunked on his floor that night. This sort of thing continued until we were almost desensitized to it. Things changed when we were getting ready to move out. My brother had moved to St. Louis. My parents had split up and my father had moved out. It was just me and my mom taking care of the house and keeping it pretty for the realtors. I was out of the house most of the day and evening, at school and hanging out with friends and whatnot. One day Mom said, "It's not happy about all the changes, you know. Acting out. Having a tantrum, I expect." "Who's not happy?" I asked. "You know. The house. And let me tell you, the dog isn't happy either." She was referring to her Jack Russell Terrier who was, and is, her constant companion. I didn't inquire into the details. One weekend, Dad came over and we did an emergency search, box, and organize in the basement. One wall had sprung a leak and ruined some documents, so we went about moving everything over to the other wall. It took us all weekend, and was backbreaking work. We had collected a lot of shit over the years. Monday afternoon, it rained again. I returned home at the same time as my mom. It turns out that the dog had finally flipped out and was running to the basement door, screaming, and running back to her arms shaking like a leaf. Finally, she had put the dog in the car and went to McDonald's. I didn't think anything of it, self-absorbed 17-year-old, remember. Dad returned on Tuesday to pick some things up. We heard, "God damn it," and every other curse word coming from the basement stairs as he stormed up. "Why did you move everything back to the other wall? The boxes are all wet now," he screamed at Mom. I went down and this is what I saw. Every box had indeed been moved to the other side of the basement, and set on its side. That is, the boxes weren't lit up, but stacked haphazardly against the wall with lids facing out. To this day, my father honestly believes, or chooses to believe, that my mom with a muscular condition undid in one day what took us two, just to irritate him. Conclusion: we were showing the house, the basement door had to be kept closed. The cat's litter box was down there, so it had been open for the last 6 years. I was watching TV, and Mom was outside brushing the dog, when someone started insistently knocking on a door. Well, it wasn't the front or back doors, because they were made of metal. It was a wooden door. I ran to the kitchen and looked dumbfounded. Mom mouthed, "Well, answer it," from the other side of the glass doors. "I'm trying." I mouthed back. And then it hit me. As soon as I realized where the knocking was coming from, it stopped. I walked over to the basement door and opened it. We left it open from then on, unless there was scheduled showing. We sold the house and never looked back. I grew up in Indonesia and knew of more people who had ghost encounters than not. Weird things tended to happen at night. When I was 12, I was playing in the yard of a family friend's house one day and had the distinct feeling I was being watched. I told some adults who laughed at me, but found out when I was older there had been prior incidents. Anyway, one week when my dad was out of town, my mom decided to rearrange their bedroom. That night, around 2 a.m., she woke up to the sound of a woman screaming. My mom got up and did a quick check of everything and seeing there was nothing, chalked it up to a dream and went back to bed. The next night, at the exact same time, the same thing happened. Bloody scream at around 2 a.m. and again, nothing. This continued for about a week before she decided to consult a spiritual friend of hers. This woman told her to put the room back the way it was, that she had disturbed a ghost, etc. She went home, rearranged the room to the way it was and everything stopped. I didn't find this out until years later and thank God, I wouldn't have slept another night there. I grew up in a tiny town in northern Ontario. Every Friday, most of the neighborhood would gather in Jeanette and Emil's kitchen and tell stories for hours. I was only 5 or 6, the only kid on the block, so I'd usually read or play with my toys in one of the 2 guest bedrooms until I fell asleep. One night, I couldn't sleep because I could hear a baby crying. I came out into the kitchen and complained to my mom. She told me to go back to sleep, but Jeanette, an experienced grandmother at the time, pulled a cookie out from the cookie jar and sent me to the living room to watch TV instead. Because of the way the house was laid out, the living room was right next to the kitchen, and I could hear the adults talking. I'm 22 now, in Texas, and it still creeps me out. When we first moved here, Jeanette started, there was a cross hanging up in the guest room. We're not really religious, and there was a lot of other crap from the old owners hanging up, so we took it all down. Their bedroom was in the basement, closest to the heater, and the kitchen, living room and guest rooms were all upstairs. We used to hear something running around upstairs, like a kid, We thought it was just the dog, or the cat. But one weekend, Emile took the dogs hunting and the cat wouldn't come in that night. So I was downstairs, alone, and I heard the footsteps. I came up to investigate, and I could hear a baby crying. Now, the neighbors were too far apart for it to be one of their kids. And their house backed up into a field that went on for miles and miles. She was confused, and wound up calling the cops because the baby just would not stop crying. The OPP came, a grizzled older guy and his partner, and the older man remembered the house from when he'd been called there 3 years ago, when the Harrisons' toddler was found dead in its crib. They searched the yard and the house, but didn't hear anything. Offhandedly, they suggested she find the cross, and put it back on the wall. She did. And she never heard the baby again. When my mother went in to get my stuff so we could leave, she realized that when I was playing, I'd knocked the small cross off the wall. On the night of September 10, 2001, I had a couple of very vivid dreams. The kind where you are half awake and almost daydreaming. In the first one I don't remember how it started, but I saw an airplane crash into a huge metal structure with a lot of windows. To be honest, I thought it was a train, but I was confused because it wasn't lying flat on the ground like a train. I then heard screams and they were so real to me that they woke me up. I was sweating and panicked. It took me about an hour to calm down and fall asleep. Then, I had the exact same dream again and it woke me up again at the exact same moment and those screams sounded just as real. This time it took me almost 2 hours to fall asleep as I was deeply disturbed that I would have the exact same dream so vividly twice in one night. When I finally fell asleep again, I had one last dream. There were a bunch of people in the air and they were flying. Not in a plane, but just flying with their arms out like Superman, zooming all over the place. Everyone was smiling and having fun. Then, all at once they stopped and started to fall. They all started screaming and I could see their terrified faces as they fell. Once again I woke up from the screams. I didn't sleep well the rest of the night. The next morning I slept in. I was in college and only had late classes that day. At about 9:30 I was woken up by my girlfriend calling me to tell me about the plane crashing into the World Trade Center. I honestly had never seen the WTC before, so I didn't know what I was about to see when I turned on the TV. All the pieces from my dreams the night before seemed to come together in this one event. It was horrible. I am being completely honest here and have not embellished one bit. I really wish this wasn't true. It troubled me so deeply that I couldn't finish the semester at school and failed and dropped out of most of my classes even though it was my senior year and I was getting ready to graduate. I have tried to get over this for years, but I still have horrible guilt and nightmares about it. I found myself checking into a hotel last minute on business in another country. Since it was last minute, I could not get a room at the normal hotels and had to book at some place I had never heard of on the outskirts of the city. The area was considered dangerous for kidnappings and robbery. As far as I could tell, I was the only visitor. There was something very odd about the sole mirror in the room. It was hung at a very strange angle. You could not use it really to look at yourself from where it was positioned, but I noticed from my bed the mirror pointed to some corner of the wall near the top of the ceiling. I thought nothing of it until I turned out the lights. I noticed for some reason, though the rest of the room was pitching black, I could see slightly the reflection in the mirror, at sometimes brighter and sometimes dimmer. It occurred to me then that there was a heating vent over to the left that I could probably see in the mirror if I were sitting exactly in the center of the bed, and I was seeing the faint green IR beam reflection in the mirror from a camera mounted in the vent, and it was actively moving, scanning the room in the dark. I went to the bathroom, got changed, grabbed my bag and left without check, grabbing the first taxi I spotted. I am pretty sure to this day I was being sized up for a robbery or worse. I was in Bermuda in the off-season, I think, with my mom, dad, and little brother. I must have been about 5 or so. It was before my other brother was born and my sister was born. I remember the hotel was empty and a man with a red vest/shirt got me some milk, I think. I remember the beach was empty. Just so you know, most of the place was empty. Cheaper maybe for us to go. I was on the beach with my parents and like 2 to 3-year-old brother was with them. I ran off to explore. I saw my mom on the beach. Come on, Nate. There was a thicket area of scrubby bushes and trees along the beach. She went up into it. There was this cement square with pipes or vents or something coming out of it. She stood there, then saw me coming and kept walking into the thicket. I felt something was wrong, but didn't want to be defiant, so I pretended I was really interested in the pipe things and said aloud, "I wonder what these are for," or something. So if she got mad I could say I was interested in the pipes or something, not just disobeying. As soon as she went out of view into the thicket, my dad came up from the beach into where I was and yelled, "Where have you been? Don't wander off like that," or something similar. He took my hand roughly and led me back the beach where my mother and brother were. I still don't know what happened. The woman looked exactly like my mom but felt wrong. When I was in high school or junior high I started dating this girl. I guess the only reason I was interested in her was because she had big boobs. Otherwise, I didn't really find her attractive. Anyway, we dated for a month or 2, but we never kissed. We just held hands. After a while, she became disinterested, and broke up with me. I wasn't too upset, because like I said, I wasn't that interested in her. After this happens, I hear from friends that she's kind of a bad. Sometime later, could have been anywhere from a few months to a year, she wants to get back with me. I told her what I had heard about her and she tells me she's changed and she wants to give it another try. I'm skeptical about her claims, but like I said, I wasn't really attracted to her, so it didn't really matter. Anyway, around that time I was at my good friend's house, when I saw she was talking to him on AIM. I had been telling him that she wanted to get back together, and I wasn't buying it, and he wasn't either. I don't remember the exact details of what happened because this was at least 10 years ago, but he invited her over to his house, and the plan was for me to stay hidden in the closet him to get her to say a bunch of nasty stuff to him to prove that she was really still a slut, and then after this happened, he was supposed to say, "The Flyers won tonight," and I was supposed to come out before anything happened. Half an hour later, she comes over, and I spend about 10 minutes in there listening to them talk dirty like, "Do you have a condom?" He's like, "No," and she's like, "Aw, too bad, blah blah," and then, I just kind of sit there until I hear the Flyers won tonight, and I walk out, just as she is finishing giving him head. Probably the most awkward moment of my life. We all just kind of sat there in silence for a while, and I think at some point she was like, "What, with her boobs still out and everything?" Oh yeah, that was the first pair of boobs I ever saw in person. After a few minutes she goes back home and I'm just sitting there like what has just happened, and asking him why he didn't stop. He said, "Dude, come on, I can't turn down free head," or something to that extent. It was weird after that whenever I saw her, because it was obvious she was still into me.
Thanks for watching. Please comment, like, share and subscribe. The Internet Surfer on YouTube for more horror and scary stories.